All right, party people, welcome to another live episode of the Peyton Pipette podcast. I am thrilled to welcome to the stage with me Marcus Whitney. Marcus is, among other things, a co-owner of a soccer team, a football club, I don't know what you call it exactly, a venture
Soccer club, soccer.
capitalist, a best-selling author, a jiu-jitsu champion, all around bad to the bone rock star. And I am excited to dive in. So a couple of things to note for Peyton Pipette listeners. We're going to get real here. Sometimes we get real, sometimes we get real, and it's going to get real today. And that's inspired by the amazing conversation Marcus and I had a couple weeks ago as we were talking about this session. He shared some things with me that, with his permission, we're just going to dig into and get into where he finds himself in his journey of creative mastery now. And he said, you know what? I'm going to do some research. I'm going to be prepared for this conversation. We appreciate the vulnerability, Marcus. We appreciate your willingness to lay it out there and share with us. And I wanted to start with something that you said just in the pre-show, right before we got started. I said, how are you feeling about putting yourself out there? And you said, I did a super hard workout, so there's no anxiety. I just got to hear, how does that relate to your life? How does bringing exercise in impact the stresses of the life of a venture capitalist, leader, author, etc.?
I think that doing hard things triggers us as humans to be able to adapt on demand to other hard things, and the familiarity that we have with hard things makes other hard things not seem so jarring. And also there's so much emerging clarity. We've been thinking about ourselves, and this is probably largely an artifact of the industrial era, compartmentalizing everything and figuring out like how this cog goes with this cog and so forth and so on, right? As opposed to when we were living in community, agrarian society. I think we just had a much more integrated view of everything. We've been thinking about like the brain and that this is where all the brain is. And now we're learning so much about, how much of our brain is actually in our gut and, our nerves and all of these other types of things. And, the body keeps the score and all that stuff. So, exhausting my body has a massive impact on my physiology and the way that I think, and specifically coming into a situation like this to be transparent, and not in a way that, I mean, nothing I'm going to say is anything I'm going to be ashamed about, but
Right.
if I hadn't worked out, there's a little bit more potential that I could be anxious about it. How am I going to come across? What are people going to think if I'm actually talking about this stuff? And I have none of that. I can't have it. I literally have no energy for it. So
no, but you said something interesting that I just want to key in on for a second. You said it's not just working out. You said exhausting my body.
yeah.
So I think some people do a workout but exhausting my body, like, talk to us about exhausting my body versus just quote unquote a workout.
Okay, so that gets into a transition that I made really last year, which was as an adult who, is a family person and a professional. I run a business and I'm on boards in the civic community and all that other kind of stuff. We all know the guidance of we should all work out, we should all exercise. Last year, I decided to take that a step further and embody the identity of an athlete. And in doing so, and doing that by saying, I'm actually going to compete, I'm going to set ambitions for myself to be competitive in jiu-jitsu, et cetera, et cetera. So when you shift from being someone who, you work out to stay healthy to being an athlete, the difference is you're not working out anymore, you're training, and you're training with purpose, and you're training with clear goals. So for example, today is 89 days to the big competition of the year for me, which is Master Worlds, that'll be in Las Vegas. So I'm on this path right now of training towards this. As an athlete, I have coaches. I have the means. I'm very fortunate to be able to do this, but I have coaches. I have a strength and conditioning coach, and he doesn't play around. I mean, I show up, I do what he tells me to do, and I'll just tell you sort of what I did today, so you can get you can get an understanding of what I mean when I say I'm
By
exhausted.
the way, this is foreshadowing. You telling us what you did today is actually good foreshadowing of you telling us some other things later. So it's like
Yeah,
it's perfectly thematically consistent, right?
great. I don't mind sharing, all about sort of how I'm living my life right now. So I have a competition tomorrow. It's just a tune-up. I don't care if I win or lose, but I have a competition. So, I text my coach on Thursday after a really hard workout and I said, "Hey, by the way, just a reminder, I'm competing." And he was like, "I don't care, nothing changes. You have to be able to compete under stress." So I was like, "Okay." So
All right.
so that was an indication of like what today was going to be. So he did compress the time that we trained, but this was the final week of the strength cycle that we're working on. And we did 5 rounds. Normally we do 10 rounds, 2 different halves. This time we did 5 rounds, and the
Okay.
core exercise was squat. And I did 5 sets, 5 reps of 425.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we did some box jumps with not box jumps, just straight up and down jumps with the weight thing that you step into the middle of. I forget what it's called, but you step into the middle of it. You can hold it with 2 handles,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that probably had 110 pounds on it. So like doing those, and then there were some kind of like hip exercises holding two. I think those were 50-pound dumbbells.
Yeah.
But the key exercise there that like destroyed me was 25 reps of squatting 425 pounds.
Dude, I know. I'm in awe right now.
Yeah,
And to
so I'm
me,
exhausted.
it's related, by the way. I mean, going back to your point, you made the point. It's this idea of compartments, right? And we can think about exercise as this separate thing, but to recognize kind of the cascading impacts it has, your physiology, your psychology, how you show up when you've stressed your body that way. I spoke with a professional athlete last week who was at a tech conference, and he had actually had an ACL injury, and so he's not able to do the same kind of training. But he said he actually does ice baths because they do the same. I said, "What does it do for you?" And he said, when you're squatting 425 or when you're in the ice bath, there's no room to think about anything else. It's like
No,
everything else goes out, right?
everything
And
else
that's
goes out.
and there's something to that, right? I just wanted to acknowledge that and honor that when you and I were preparing, and I asked you, are you ready to dive into the conversation today, that you referenced the workout? Because I think a lot of people think, all right, what do I have to do to get ready? And it's their body gets removed from the equation. I think
Oh
it's a
yeah.
shame. How did you learn that, by the way? Or how did you learn that you actually needed to be creating the space to incorporate your body into your whole life kind of preparedness?
Just generally as I was getting older, I recognized I needed to be working out just to kind of stay in shape. I started like gaining weight. I mean, it's kind of typical, you get married. Okay, well, maybe you don't need to think about looking so good because you're married, you're happily married, right? And then,
Hey, hey, hey,
you start
come
having
on.
kids and all this other kind of stuff. So anyway, I kind of got out of sorts. But then I would say the other real thing, the real health issue that I ran into was drinking. Like I was working really hard being an entrepreneur. I was like, running half marathons or whatever, but I was also drinking. And it was as I continued to get older and, the realities of the world got more intense, the drinking became more and more of just a real negative force in my life.
Yeah.
So a little over 4.5 years ago, I quit. And when I did that and I gave myself some space, I actually was talking to somebody yesterday about like, what was the number one benefit that you got out of not drinking? And I said, better sleep. Now ask me what the number one benefit is of better sleep. It's like everything. You know what I mean? So actually
Yeah.
like not drinking was not the thing. It was not drinking gave me back my sleep.
Right. It's
You
like, do
know,
you want to start your day at 60% or at 100%? It's like,
totally.
like how many people plug in their phones at night so they start their like if you think about sleep as like basically plugging your body in, like imagine how many nights would it take when you woke up and your phone's at 60% before you got a new charger?
Right,
For me,
right,
it'd be like
right.
2 days, right? It's like this
Yeah,
thing's
yeah.
broken. But
Yep.
most people are like, no, I can wake up at 60%. I'm good. It's like you're crazy, right? No way.
Yeah, when you get used to it, you just keep doing it, right? You're just used
Mm,
to it, and you've sort of settled into that energy pattern, that energy level. You start accepting that as your reality, as the
yeah.
baseline for what life is supposed to be. And so once I started sleeping better, I just started realizing, oh man, I have so much more capacity that I didn't know I had before, but I also
Mm,
had more time. And what am I going to fill that time with, right?
Wow.
And so I
Wow.
started filling that time with being more engaged in living inside of my body, living with my body, right?
Okay, so you saying capacity. I'm just like, I'm chomping at the bit. I realize I'm holding myself back, but I'm chomping at the
No,
bit
all
now.
good.
You're talking about your capacity. Let's just dive into you. And what I'd like to start with today, what we're going to be talking about for folks who are just tuning in right now is really next level. That's one of the things that came up again and again is Marcus getting to the next level in his journey. And you talked about how there is a whole other level and you want to get there and you've kind of been putting it off. You kind of been thinking about it. You've been kind of plotting, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today, what it takes to get to the next level, how to define it, etc. I think it has implications for all of us in our lives where we've got a chapter behind us, and people may look at you and go, well, I can't compare to that, but everybody's got a book of experience that they're now drawing upon as they think about plotting the way forward. And so I think this will have incredible implications for everyone. I wanted to key in on one phrase that you mentioned to me as we were speaking the other day, where you basically said something to the effect that, because we're talking about your book, Create and Orchestrate.
Yeah.
And you said, weirdly, this year has been the least creative, probably. But you said, I have done the math and it's worth the time. And I thought that's a really interesting place to start because there's so much tension there. Can you tell us a little bit about what does it mean that this was a least creative year? And also, what does it mean to have done the math and you have made the decision that it's worth it? I realize there's a lot there, but let's start there.
Yeah. So I like to create. And I would say over the last 20 years, I would be hard pressed to find any 2-year stretch where I didn't try to create something meaningful and new in my life. That might be a business, that might be some type of club, and the things that have endured till today that I can reference are, Nashville Soccer Club, Jumpstart Health Investors, my book. So those are just 3 quick examples of things like that. Last year, I would actually say the big thing was creating without any doubt my identity as an athlete, which was a form of creation because I had a ton of imposter syndrome about actually being able to say that about myself, because I think generally speaking, the world says after you're, once you're in your 30s, like you're not really an athlete. You know what I mean? Like you're just an old person trying to stay in shape. Right.
Yeah.
So the level of training, the commitment, the time I put in, and then the results that I got in competition, all of that, codified. No, I am actually, I am an athlete, and this is now an enduring part of my, reality. So actually what has happened is, and a lot of this is tied to, once I stopped drinking, I've been performing better, generally speaking. So things have been more successful. The things that I've created are enduring. That the fact that they endure takes time. And I now have this portfolio of work between the book, which manifests mostly in keynote speaking that I do. Let's say I do that 6 to 8 times a year. Okay. Let's just say, the fund that I manage, and that is my day job, right? So I'm doing that pretty much all the time. I don't have any official working role with the soccer team, but the stadium is a 5-minute walk from my front door. They play 20 plus games a year.
Don't act like that doesn't take time.
It takes time. I have a bunch of seats. I'm always inviting people. It's a big part of my life, right? It's a big part of my life in terms of the amount of time and energy that it takes. And then, the cherry on top is Jiu Jitsu, where I'm now training, whether it's strength and conditioning, mobility, Pilates, or actual Jiu Jitsu, I don't know, 12 hours a week or something like that, so, and probably more than that. Not to include my competitions that I'm actually doing, which will, kind of eat a weekend up. So if you take all those things that I'm so blessed to be able to have, and you just think about a day, a week, a month, a quarter, a year, it's like I've run out of space.
Now you're getting to the answer to the question of why is this the least creative year? I'm hearing a bunch of creative pursuits, but you've called that the least creative year. Why is that?
So at the end of last year, my birthday is December 30th. So every end of the year, it's really cool because as everyone is thinking about the new year, I'm also thinking about the new year, but I'm also thinking about my personal new year. And at the end of last year, I had this very different feeling than I have had in any year in recent memory. And it could be a first ever, but and certainly recent memory, which was I didn't have any particular thing new that I was excited about. It was
I see.
all just
I
like
see.
maintaining
Yeah,
and
you're
scaling.
sustaining this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maintaining, and maybe you could consider it scaling, but I would say mostly mostly holding on and improving, probably, qualitative improvements of the things that I have created, doing those. And there was also this this sense that, man, I've become so undeniable. And this, so part of what we talked about was, the hard honest thing is I'm going to speak about myself in a way I would not normally speak about myself, because
Yes,
people would be
yes.
like, oh, this is your ego, blah blah blah. But in order to work through this, I have to I have to tell the truth, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah, I
it's
was gonna
like,
I'm happy to give a disclaimer if you want me to give a disclaimer for you.
yeah, I would not normally speak like this, but we agreed, like, we're going to use this as a bit of a workshop to allow, also maybe to give people permission to speak about themselves in the same sort
Yeah,
of honesty, right? It's
yeah.
like, I'm pretty undeniable at this point,
Mm,
now, of course, things can go wrong and I can still fail and all sorts of things like that, but
yeah,
just, you know my work ethic, my competency, my credibility, the accomplishments, it's like, uh, I don't have anything to prove. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? Like,
yeah,
now I still need to deliver. I'm managing a fund. I need to deliver great returns in that fund. That's different than feeling like deeply intrinsically I have something to prove.
right, right.
Those are not the same thing.
Yeah,
I wake up every day and I feel thrilled that I get to do the things that I get to do, but I don't feel this burning sense of needing to prove that I'm competent and capable, because the world has reflected back to me at this point in my life, dude, you're good.
yeah. So maybe
You're really good.
maybe that's a good point for those who maybe aren't familiar, or even just to give you a chance to kind of take stock. And the disclaimer part is this: I've asked Marcus to come and share honestly where he's at without bragging. He's not, this isn't his idea, it's my idea, but share with us where you're at, so that, because the question really is, how do I take it to the next level? You said you haven't done it at the next level yet, but you've been thinking about it. So before we talk about the next level, we got to talk about, what is this level? Where have you attained to? And then how do you start to think about what's next and bringing some of that creativity to bear on this next chapter?
Yeah. So I would say, from a net worth perspective, um, I'm I'm certainly in a pretty solid position. Um, I'm managing a $55 million fund personally, but my entire platform, of which I'm, on the board of, a co-founder and a significant, owner, manages over $120 million. We've been building that over the last 8 years, and we're honestly just getting started. We're continuing to grow. I've released a book. My first book was a bestseller. It continues to sell hundreds of copies, some months, over 1,000 copies. Um and I worked really hard for almost 10 years, starting in 2014, doing my first TEDx talk, to be like a viable keynote speaker.
Yeah.
And now I have a great agent. You know I only do substantial bookings, or I do stuff like I'm about to do I'm actually pretty excited. I'm going to do a keynote for the Big Brothers Big Sisters graduation. That's gonna,
Cool.
so basically I only do it for free,
That's yeah, exactly. Yeah,
for
I was
free,
gonna
for
say.
stuff that I feel really honored to do, or like, it's like, it would shock most people to know like how much I charge for a keynote now,
Yeah, yeah.
and get. But this is something I've been developing as a skill set for 9 years, so
Mm.
now I can go with no preparation, walk into a room and deliver,
And deliver. Yeah,
and
yeah,
deliver solidly. And it could be a room of 300 people or a room of 3,000 people. Like, it doesn't matter. I've got the ability to do that.
yeah.
Um, you know, I'm definitely a minority owner, but I have an ownership stake in a professional sports team in the United States of America. I mean, that's like a ridiculous thing that many people aspire to do one day. And you know, it's it's my reality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
part of my reality. And then the most recent thing has been, jujitsu. Like I started training 2.5 years now. I'm obviously competing mostly in my age group and also at my belt level, but in my age group and at my belt level, I'm a world champion, and that's just not deniable. You know what I mean? It's just a
Yeah.
fact. I won.
Yeah.
So it's like, and all of this was not always true. In fact, like a lot of this stuff actually finally culminated in the last 5 years, quite frankly.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there
Sure.
was more than 15 years of like hard work without a whole lot to show for it, building up to me being finally ready to get here. And so now I'm here. I'm kind of out of time, right?
Mm. In what
But
sense? Free time, free bandwidth, you
free,
mean?
free bandwidth, right? In order to
Yeah.
continue to do all these things I've mentioned that really are super important to me and mean a lot, they all require time. They all require time, focus, energy, uh, commitment. And so I'm a little bit out of time. Then you have to also add in family, and I've spent a lot of really important quality time with my family this year, and I intend to continue doing that. So I think the thing is, now that I'm here and I've done these things, and these are things that if you had told 18-year-old me this would be happening, dude, it would freak me out to know that,
Yeah. Blow your mind.
to know that I would be able to have this life, right? Um, and yet now I'm here,
And you're
right?
here. So now you're here, and you and I were talking about next level. What is next level as you've reflected on it? What does it mean to you? Because is there another level? Is there another gear? And what before we talk about how to get there, where is there in your mind, given where you are, given that there's no more time, what does it look like to go to the next level?
So the best I can do is I can tell you what I've been thinking. Okay. So one thing for the first time, and I think it's very much tied to this, this removal of this need to prove myself. Um, for sure, I feel that um, I'm having the first real thoughts about retirement. Now, I'm not in retirement zone at all, but this year I've literally been thinking about like, okay, but when, when would
Mm,
I, right? Because
mm,
if I'm just going to be maintaining this and
right,
growing, okay, so the net worth grows and the size of the fund grows and I win more championships and I go to more games and you know what I mean? You get what I'm saying? Like,
right, right.
books, I do more keynotes. Okay, that there's nothing wrong. I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying that that sense that I'm actually embarking on something new isn't really there. So
Mm,
so I have been thinking, wow, back to the point about I've spent the time to calculate the value of not doing something new, and it's the right thing for
yeah,
me to be doing right now. The right thing for me
yeah,
to do right now is to continue doing the stuff I'm doing. Okay, you know, that's really clear, but it does start to push me out and think, well, what about 7 years from now? What about 10 years from
right.
now? What
Well,
does
and,
that look
and
like?
so
And I'll still be young. I'm 47. I mean, 7 years, I'm 55. I'm young. So
definitely.
yeah.
So maybe let's go back to the math. Because you said I've done the math. What does it look like to do the math for you? And when you project out 7 years, are you just hitting copy paste on the columns, or how do you think
No,
about? Yeah,
no,
tell
no.
us about that.
I mean, I very much think about like wiping most, I don't know if all, but wiping most of the columns out, you know. I mean, it's everything from, totally doing nonprofit work to considering public service for the first time ever to thinking, well, do I want a brighter star in the sense of like, you know, bigger social media followings and actually doing a book deal with a publisher and like is that because all of those things now feel much more on the table than before, and I'm not necessarily leaning any particular way, but I am having to acknowledge that I've kind of closed out a challenge,
Mm,
and I'm
mm.
in a bit of a holding pattern. That's just the truth. I'm in a bit of a holding pattern. I can't just sporadically try to create something because I'm old enough and wise enough now to know I don't really have the bandwidth for it. I have ideas, but
Yeah,
there's no time to do them well. I know that.
Well, you said something to me the other day that I wanted to come back to, which is relevant here. You said, I'm testing a lot of things in little ways. And I'd love to
Yeah.
know, what does it look like to be testing at this level? And how do you think about deploying tests? Because we talk at Stanford at the D school and with entrepreneurs a lot about scrappy experiments and rapid prototyping to learn quickly. So if you could give us just a peek at what is the
What does
suite of
that look like?
experiments and what does it look like when you say I'm testing a lot of things in little ways, what does that look like? What are a couple examples?
Yeah. So a couple examples would be um, taking some discretionary, you know, money that I have and working with, a friend who's a great, brand developer to like design a brand, right? I'm not ready to launch the brand at all, but just kind of working through all the all the difficult parts of like building a brand, right? What
Yeah,
would
yeah,
okay, what would the audience be? How would this thing be positioned? What's the archetype of the brand? Okay, what would it look like and all? So, I'm playing. There's no intent to launch said thing, but like I'm playing in that sense. So that's one way I'm experimenting. Another way is just conversations. Just being open to having conversations um that I was not open to have before because I was in the process of striving and
yeah,
creating with real serious intent.
yeah.
Now I'm able to have like a bunch of exploratory conversations with people, just even like learning about what their life is like in public service or being a retired person who mostly spends their time doing nonprofit board work or and just like learning from them and getting a sense of how that might fit for me. How might that fit?
Yeah. Yeah.
um so it's a lot of that, right? I mean, I don't know how I can go much further than that without getting in the danger zone, you know what I mean, of like actually like doing something. But that's
Yeah. Well, I
that's
mean,
been that's been it. I mean, spending a little money is actually, that feels pretty tangible,
yeah.
when I've
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
spent
Well,
some
to,
money on
to
like
me,
something to develop.
one thing I wanted to mention is, one of my creative heroes is Jerry Seinfeld. And
Mm,
I think there's bearing on your case. Not that, by the way, this isn't like advisory or anything, but just one thing it's
yeah.
making me think of is Seinfeld. If you, I don't know, have you ever seen the documentary, The Comedian?
No.
Okay, you should watch it like Netflix, like tonight. And everybody
Okay.
is watching here or listening
Okay.
later. You should watch it. But to me, it has bearing for one very important reason. It's filmed of Seinfeld after the show Seinfeld is over, right? So you can think about all like he's a meteoric, global phenom
Yeah.
at this point. And he says, show's over. I want to go back to stand up. And you go, wow, I mean, you've had the best show in the world for the last 10 years. Like call Letterman, he'll have you on tomorrow. It's only 15 minutes. You've been writing a 30-minute show every week. No, no, no. It's not how he does it. You know what he does? He goes into the comedy clubs and he bombs every single night for a year. And to me, the thing is fascinating is you think about Seinfeld, we see him on Letterman, you go, dude, this guy, 10 million of us think he's a genius. Well, how does he get to the point where 10 million people think he's a genius? It turns out the formula, if you want a very simple formula, is 100, it's the people who attend the show, times 300, the nights per year, uh, you know, uh, 30,000 people thinking he's a doofus equals 10 million people thinking he's a genius, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so my point is, I can't help but wonder, Marcus, for you, what's your comedy club? Like, what is the arena in which you can experiment and try things out to learn what's worth getting on Letterman, so to speak?
I think that's a great analogy. One other thing I want to point out about it is a big part of what I think I need to remember is going to be important for my overall being in whatever I try to do next is to not limit it to things that I know I'm good at. Um, you know, I uh the discomfort of being a beginner again is
Right.
is actually something that's actually one of the things the closest I come to that right now is jujitsu, just because jujitsu is so incredibly complex and difficult. It's so hard to become good at it that every time I go train, I feel dumb and I feel like a beginner. And it's not just
That's
because I'm
great.
starting at an old
No,
age,
but
right?
that's
It's
part of the training, right? That to me, like you've got to be, you have to find an environment where you can be a beginner.
yep.
And the thing, like there's this awesome scene, not to give away like anything too much, but you'll love this. There's this great scene in The Comedian where imagine attending, you see Seinfeld on a billboard for a comedy club, right? You go in, there's 100 people there,
Yep.
and the great Jerry Seinfeld's on the stage, right? And you start watching him do his bit, and he forgets a line. Okay, do you have the audacity? Do you have the audacity to heckle him?
Yeah.
Because in this show, this woman Seinfeld forgets a line, and she goes, "Is this your first time, buddy?" And I mean, it's so visceral. And Seinfeld, he breaks the fourth wall, and he looks at her and he says, "This is how comedians develop material, and ma'am, as you can tell, it's quite painful." and to me, it's so poignant because there is no way to go from Seinfeld to Letterman. You have to go through this. It doesn't. Seinfeld did not protect him from the need to go through the valley of experimentation, right?
Yeah.
And to me, the danger of a brand, the danger of the Marcus Whitney brand, so to speak, is you go, well, it's too precious. I can't. And what Seinfeld did, he basically said, you know what? To 100 people, I'm willing to look like a doofus. I've got to do it. It's the only way I'm going to look like a genius to 10 million people. And I think finding one's comedy club it's a really apt metaphor. But where are the insulated, contained environments where I can look like a doofus? I mean, or my brand can look other than it might look eventually, so that I can learn. Because Seinfeld's routine is he gets up every morning, he's got a yellow legal pad, and he's writing jokes. And he's reviewing his notes from yesterday. And he's got line by line notes on timing didn't work. I mean, he's cutting syllables out, right? He's that. But the point is, you talked about trying things out earlier. To me, a high fidelity experiment doesn't mean it's high scale. It means, like Seinfeld, I'm very clear on what I'm trying, and I have a meaningful feedback loop, right? And what he's trying, on Thursday is I waited 2 more beats before I landed the punchline. And the feedback loop is, did they laugh? Right. I mean, and granted, he's blessed with a very short feedback loop. Yeah. But to me, it's really easy to kind of let ourselves off the hook with a generic, I'm trying stuff, but we have no clear outcome. There's no laughter, right? There's actually no clear outcome variable, in which case we can let ourselves off the hook in a million different ways and say, yeah, it worked. Per what? Right.
Yeah.
But if we get super clear on the outcome variable I'm measuring is blank, and what I'm trying to do to deliver that outcome variable is blank, then at least I can be intellectually honest with myself, right? But it's actually way harder because then you have to define those two things. Whereas like just doing some stuff, it's like, I don't know. I guess it worked. I guess it didn't. I don't know.
All right. Well, I kind of know what that means I need to do.
Well, let's talk about it. What are the implications for you? I mean, let's just go there. Is like I can only bring the comedy club. I don't know what it looks like in your life, but how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that so I've got this very, very careful dance I have to walk, right? Which is truly my focus on the things that I'm doing now. It's not only protecting my ego, it's really my commitment to others. Now, are there things I could pull out of there that don't have that same level of commitment? Yeah. So for example, I could pull Jiu Jitsu out. That's like a pretty easy one to point to.
Somewhat modular,
yeah. That's a pretty easy one. I could reclaim a bunch of time. I feel like I would actually be robbing myself if I did that, but it would at least be one that didn't have the kind of commitment to other people that things like managing a multi-million-dollar fund has. Like, that is not a joke. Right. You're a fiduciary. You have real commitment to other people, right? And so I'm very clear about that part, right? I'm very clear about that part. And at the same time, I think that there are things I can do, especially through the vehicle of empowering other people, because I think I'm kind of at a stage where I can do that, where I can empower other people, right? And I don't want to say create through them as if they are a vessel for my ideas. I don't mean that.
No.
But this process of having conversations and exploring, I think can and usually does lead to the potential of collaboration with other people, um, and where I could serve a role that's much more appropriate given my current commitments,
Yeah.
board
Still.
chairman,
Yeah. Yeah.
something of that nature, but still kind of have that creative vehicle to do, to do the work, right? And
The other suggestion I would just submit to you here is I can't help but wonder whether there's an opportunity for a reframe, and whether instead of seeing like scaling these, it's like I can either be creative or I can scale these things. I
yep,
wonder what it looks like to treat scaling as the creative act, and start to see, okay,
that's
what
fair.
are discrete prototypes and experiments I can deploy in service of scaling, not in service of creation from whole cloth, but
That's
in
fair.
service of what I'm already doing. Right. And like one of the things I think about, I'm working with the CEO right now of an advertising firm. And one of the things that we start talking about is, hey, one of the first things I'll do is somebody say, let's run an experiment. Right. And then
Hmm.
wherever it
Hmm.
is, it gives me, it's like a physical therapist asking you to touch your toes. I learn a lot just for that one thing. Right. So I say run an experiment. He gets a little tripped up, right? But then we start talking about, well, hey, what's really working? And he says, well, okay, one thing that's really working is, in our team meetings, when people ask questions, things go really well. I go, great.
Mm.
Okay, so let's just take for a second, a hypothesis is we want people to ask more questions in team meetings. This is very like basic, but simple
Yep.
and
Yep.
easy to follow. Okay, well, what could you do to get people to ask more questions in meetings? And he rattled off like 4 or 5 things. I go, great. In the next 3 weeks, try thing 1 in week 1, thing 2 in week 2, thing 3 in week 3. But importantly, here's the thing: write down how many questions people ask.
Oh, that's great. That's
And
great.
then when we talk in a month, let's debrief. You did this thing in this week. How many questions did people ask? This thing in this week, how many questions? And then, okay, so now you've got a number value for each of these weeks, right? There's 5, there's 10, there's 7.
Mhm.
Now ask a different question, which is, how did it feel? Because our meta hypothesis is more questions makes meetings feel
Makes me
better,
right.
which we still don't know, right? But there's kind of 2 levels of experimentation there. But the thing that struck me was that is an example of scaling as the creative act, rather
Yep.
than he's not creating from nothing there. He's actually trying to make the team more effective and hum and, riff with each other in a more fulfilling and enriching way. But as the CEO, what I know is if he'll bring that experimentation mindset there, the team environment can actually be his laboratory.
So I think that's a really important reframe for me because um it's what I would not want anyone who was watching or listening this to come to the conclusion of is that I'm not very, very happy with the set of activities that I have on a day-to-day basis. I'm
Of
very, very
course,
happy.
of
I'm very,
course.
very happy doing the things that I'm
No, but
doing.
you feel the opportunity potential, right? It's like
It's
it's a
fantastic.
weight. It's like, what do I do
It,
with what I've been given, right?
at the end of the day, and people who know me know this, if I wasn't happy, I would not be doing these things. Right. So I am very, very
Mm.
happy doing the things that I'm doing. And I certainly do approach what I do naturally as a creative and in a creative way.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
see this work as creative. Um, having been a prolific creator from scratch,
right. A
I,
particular
I
definition, all of a sudden.
I have a deep
Yeah,
association with that, right? I have a deep association with this. Oh, I'm not the guy who's done one thing. You know
right,
what I mean? So like
right,
there's a big part of my identity that's wrapped up in doing multiple, having been able to create, often co-create multiple things. And therefore, like
right, right,
if I'm not co-creating or creating something net new, am I actually creating? Right.
right,
That's an identity issue for me.
right.
So that reframe was that's like a very good one for someone like me.
Well, and what I would say, I mean, going into your own content, right? I mean, and I didn't want you to come here and do a keynote, right? Folks can see lots of amazing
Yeah,
videos of you
they're
on the
online,
internet, right?
whatever.
But like, take your 8 concepts, right? Just
Yeah,
as an
right,
example.
right.
I can imagine, right? In one sense, you have a portfolio of activities, right? There, from soccer to the book to
Yeah.
keynote speaking to the fund, right? There's 4 right there.
Mm.
Well, one way to think about creating is I got to have a 5th thing, right? Which is, but if you think of scaling as the creative act, maybe I drill into the fund and I go, wow, there's 8 areas here, 8 concepts here. Which one could I drive with experimentation? Right. Which one, is the marketing, or operations? I'm not going to tell you, obviously, your 8 concepts, but the point is you can kind of dig in and go, whoa, I've never thought about experimenting on the sales channel.
Yep.
And now if I'm really clear about it, like that might be, it's a way of actually kind of putting more wood behind the arrows, but in a creative and an experimental way.
Yep. All fair and true. And also, like, things that I'm doing, I just really am not giving myself, I'm just not giving myself credit for those things as being particularly creative. I'm mostly looking at them, I'm mostly looking at those things as like, kind of operational, you know what I mean? So it's like, and only because it's not net new,
Right.
it's within something that already exists, even if it's an aspect of it that is net new of that thing that already exists. Right. You know what I mean? Which we're constantly working on
definitions,
that.
right? It just comes down to your personal definition. And for me, sometimes, like, I teach with a legendary mechatronics professor at Stanford, and he says the only thing better than solving a problem is disappearing a problem. And to me, there's something really powerful about a reframe, right? Like when the problem just goes away, I don't even have to solve it, right?
Yep.
And there could be, I'm not saying this is true, but there could be almost this like existential angst of like, I'm not creating. And if you just recast what it means to create, you go, all of a sudden that's gone, right? I am creating. I am, right? And that's different than saying, how might I bring creativity? Or it's like, actually, no, that's not, that old definition no longer serves me. And now I need to recast creating in a way that serves me now and that reinforces my identity and brings breath and life to the stuff that I want to be amplifying.
Yep. That all resonates.
It's fun.
And it shouldn't surprise you. It's also stuff that I tend to tell other people, so it's like,
right. No, I mean, it's all like, the problem is I can't solve my own problems. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
This is why, I mean, going back all the way to the beginning of the conversation, right? We're meant to do life in community. We're meant to do life in relation to one another, because, I'll tell you a fascinating, I had on the podcast recently, a fantastic thinker named David McCraney. He's got a podcast called You're Not So Smart. That's all about cognitive biases. And he's writing a book now on genius. He's so good. And he actually came and shadowed me at Stanford recently and spent some time in the classroom. We did a bunch of stuff together. And he told me about this study. You'll love this, Marcus. He said researchers have put somebody in virtual reality sitting in front of Freud. And Freud will ask him questions about, all right, tell me about your problem. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you can choose your own adventure. Skinner, Jung, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, whatever.
You're sitting in front of a psychologist, you tell him the problem. And then via VR, they have you go to the other side of the table and they have an avatar say what you just said, and they prompt you to respond.
Ooh.
As a psychologist. And they do this a number of times. David told me something like 75% of people say that they have a meaningful breakthrough on their problem.
Wow.
They're literally talking to themselves, right?
That sounds amazing.
It's actually a fantastic, there's so much commentary there, but I think it's really hard for us to play that role for ourselves. And I mean, I find myself, like, I kid you not, I saw one of my favorite students ever. She is now at Google X, right? She's incredible. And I ran into her at a coffee shop in Palo Alto the other day, and she said something like, so tell me what's going on. And I kind of, just like you have with me, I kind of just unloaded a bunch of stuff. And she goes, I kid you not, she goes, Jeremy, you know what you should do? You should take the scrappiest, fastest action to eliminate one of those risks there. And my first thought was, that's such a profoundly great idea.
Yeah.
And my next thought was, I taught you that in class. I told you that, right? Yes. I was like, Amy, did you just repeat my lesson back to me? She goes, I did, right? And that's like the beauty of this stuff, right? It's like, to me, that's why we enjoy these conversations, not because we don't know it, but because we don't know it for ourselves, right?
Totally. And I talked a lot. I don't talk about it as much anymore, but I talked a lot for a while about being in therapy, because it was, I mean, I still am, but it was just so profound, the breakthroughs that I
Yeah.
would have, having things that were hiding in the shadows reflected back to me in a
Right.
way, in a way that was, non-judgmental, right? You know what I mean? Where I could just like actually deal with the thing with no sort of shame or
Yeah.
guilt attached to it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it is a powerful, powerful mechanism, right? That ability to have reflection, but with another person,
Yeah.
with another
Exactly.
person. And so
Exactly.
I submit to that as, I mean, to me, honestly, like that's, I get a lot of that in my athletic activities with coaches. It's like,
Right.
I'm doing something, but they see what I'm doing, and they
And they're
see it
telling
in a
you to
way.
do it. They're giving you feedback. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that out of body experience. Going back, I mean, kind of full circle, right? We are embodied creatures, and we impose this false distinction on ourselves a lot, which is not helpful. But then there's also this: we actually need the out of body experience too. Kind of coming full circle. Ironically, we need the full, not disembodied, but out of body, where there's feedback and there's perspective and there's counsel. To me, it's actually a beautiful way to close the conversation. Hey, folks, I know we're running up against time. Thank you for joining us today. Marcus, I want to say from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of our community, thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for diving in. I hope it's been helpful to you just to talk through. This is a very unique episode of the podcast. But to me, when you and I were introduced and we started diving into where you are in your journey, I thought there's nobody else I'd rather enjoy digging into these kind of personal issues with than you. So thanks for opening up to us, sharing your story with us, and know that you got a bunch of people in the Paint and Pipette crew that are in your corner and excited to see what you do next.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you. This was awesome. Fantastic way to close out the week. And I'm glad it wasn't just some like talking head presentation. I think this is the reality. I mean, I guess this is just where this will be my parting shot, but this is the reality. It's like, no matter what you think you believe about someone, they are a human, and they are for sure dealing with all the same stuff that all humans do. And there's insecurity and there's unknowing about their own path. And I'm finding myself in one of the happiest, most accomplished, most fulfilled times of my life, still being part of this human condition and still wondering, why am I
Yeah.
here? What am I
Yeah.
doing? What's my purpose? I wake up every day with very purposeful things, but like, what the heck am I
Mm.
doing? So
Mm.
it has been really, really helpful and fun to unpack it with you. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, we're all on the journey together. That's right. And I'm privileged to get to be a student in the classroom with you. And hopefully, folks, if they take nothing else away from today, they take heroes are people too. Heroes are
Yeah.
people who are facing problems and who are seeking to keep getting better themselves. And we're all on this journey together. And it's a delight to get to learn from you today, Marcus. So thanks for your time. And
Thanks so
folks, with
much.
that, we'll see you in 2 weeks. We got Liz Wiseman, and then in 4 weeks, we've got Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired, who's going to be here to talk about his book, Excellent Advice for Living, which we can't wait to dive into. Until then, be good, everyone.